This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Welcome to CyberSound. I'm your host, Jason Pufahl, joined today by Mark Jennings, part of our vISO team. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Jason, how you doing?
So this is the second podcast. I think we've done like 140 podcasts. I don't believe anybody has seen me solo in all of that time. So 2 in a row, everybody gets to put up with me alone with a guest. So Mark, I appreciate you joining today.
No, thanks for having me.
And it's interesting. Your CMMC has, I think, finally gotten a lot of the formality that it has been lacking for a long time, which, frankly, I think that lack of formality caused a lot of companies to, not make the progress they should have in that time because they're really waiting for it to sort of stabilize.
Right. Yeah. And people have been saying for years it's really never going to happen because it's a government program, and that's how those go. So, but it's here. It's definitely here now, and yeah.
So, what I want to avoid, as we thought through this a little bit, there's so much content out there around enforcement dates and audit requirements, and things I think that are pretty straightforward to get. The questions that I feel like I'm asked often are more like, what do we actually need to do to meet some of these obligations? What are the complexities? People invariably ask, well, how much is it going to cost? We're going to avoid that for this podcast because I think it's too hard a question to answer. But everybody wants me to be able to say, if you do these 10 things, you'll be compliant. It's going to cost you X, which just isn't that practical. But I do want to spend time on what are the most difficult parts, and in a way, where do people need to start? And I think that's probably the part that I want you to start with, which is, if you're going to tackle this, what's the best way to lay the groundwork to be successful ultimately?
Yeah. So, all of this focuses on controlled, unclassified information and how you handle that. That's really what it's all about. And the hardest thing for most organizations to begin with is they don't have a whole lot of control over the CUI that they handle. It comes into the organization and it just kind of propagates throughout the whole organization. And so when you're going in for an assessment, one of the first things you need to do is identify what the scope is. So that's all of the information, all of the parts of your environment where CUI may find itself, where who's going to touch it, what devices it ends up on, where how it flows, all of that. The more control you have over that, and the smaller the scope, you're going to reduce the costs of everything. So we talked, we're not going to talk about cost, but that is one way to really, get your hands around, how much is this really going to cost, and what systems do I have to actually touch and upgrade or isolate or whatever. That's one of the hardest things to do, and it's the very first part of the process.
I just want to make one clarifying statement, because I think you've said CUI multiple times.
Yes.
We're talking level 2 assessments, right? Because FCI, level 1 primarily, right? So vast majority of people, level 2.
Correct. Yeah. Level 1 is, it's 15 controls. It's very basic. It's, and that's for federal contract information, which actually the scope for that is usually the entire organization, because people are going to be talking about the contracts. But again, we're going to focus on, the hard part is level 2. That's,
So how do you go about then working through, I'll call it the system security plan, because that's, how they define it. But, generally that scoping process and setting your organizational boundaries for this.
Yeah. So basically, you identify where the CUI goes. You create basically what's called a CUI flow diagram. And you basically, mine are just basically arrows and, all over the place. And it's like, it comes in here and then it goes there. And then this person touches it, that department touches it, So then you're identifying, okay, these are all the things that are potentially within scope, at the beginning. One of the things that, again, once you're done that, you kind of want to look at it and say, is there a way that we can reduce that? So does it always have to go from this person to that person, or can we obfuscate some CUI, throughout the process? All kinds of ways to really address that, reduce the scope, because again, the next step is you're going to have to take a look, take an inventory of all of the, people, processes, and things that it touches. And those are within scope. So that's what the assessor is going to be looking at. And that's what needs to meet all 320, 110, 300 controls, 320 assessment objectives. If you miss one, essentially it's game over. There is a process you can get by with most of it and put things on a plan of action and milestones, but that's that's
they want you to get 100% is their goal.
absolutely. It's ultimately within 6 months of that assessment, you got to be 100% or you start over. And you're
so and based on what I'm inferring here a little bit, but based on what you said, part of the discussion in the development of the SSP might be, can you change your business practice a little bit such that CUI doesn't flow over here and we can take that out of the scope? I mean, you're having that kind of conversation then.
Exactly. Especially, you think about a manufacturing floor, there's not a lot of security. There's safety controls and there's all kinds of things to keep people safe. But in terms of information flow, it's very tough to lock down an an environment that, is basically manufacturing widgets or whatever.
So how reasonable is it to constrain that scope? And part of my question, we didn't talk about this, but part of my question probably is, GCC high comes up a lot.
Yep.
And so I can certainly wrap my head around, some certain data flows and minimizing that. Can you minimize also the GCC high potential spend? Because I feel like that tends to be one of the more expensive areas. Right. Certainly one of the areas of concern for organizations. How do you address that?
So basically, let's say you've got 200 employees in your organization. Now, if the entire organization is within scope, that's going to now pretty much everybody has to have a compliant email system, file sharing, all of that. If now you can say, oh, you know what, we're going to create an enclave here. We're going to say these 25 people are, touch CUI. We've controlled it to the point that this small group of people touches CUI. They can send an email, they can file share it, they can do everything. Now, suddenly your GCC high spend goes from 200 users to 25. Now the other 175, they can be on commercial. Like, so you're on, Office 365 commercial. So that is a great example of how reducing the scope can reduce the overall cost.
Yeah. And GCC high often is a huge portion of the spend, right? And it's a monthly recurring cost. There's a fair amount to implement it. That's an area where you really get some benefit.
Absolutely. And all the other, anything else that's going to, process, store, or transmit CUI, your backup system, if you can, let's say you've got, however many gigabytes or terabytes of data you've got on the commercial side of your business, but you've got, this amount of data that, that handles CUI that has to be stored in the cloud. Well, that needs to go to a FedRAMP authorized backup provider. And there's not that many of those out there. So, and again, those are going to be way more expensive per gigabyte or per terabyte or however they manage their programs. But everything that touches CUI is just more expensive. Yeah.
Right.
So
yeah, every time.
Yeah.
As people start to think about multi-factor, which frankly, it's just, in my opinion, right, it's not that interesting in a lot of ways. I think most companies have solved it. The place that I feel there's continual challenges are, hey, I've got my folks on the shop floor. They're not really day-to-day computer users, but they need to log into, one of these half dozen computers to get parts information or whatever. How do you generally work around the complexity of multi-factor in an environment like that? And right, you might not want them to bring their cell phones or devices into the floor, right? You've got all of that. That tends to be, if not a huge technical hurdle, maybe just a sort of a productivity hurdle for people. How do you have that conversation?
Well, I mean, it's tough because it is required. There has to be multi-factor authentication for, even getting onto your computer internally inside the organization. So, it really depends on the organization in terms of what the method is. They don't allow cell phones into the organization, so you can't have, duo push or whatever. Right. But you can do, RSA fobs, or you can do something that, essentially is tied to their account. Another thing that you find in organizations is shared accounts. So you basically have, I'm out on the floor. I need to go over do something in the ERP or do something, and but I don't have to log in as myself. I want to, so we all use a shared account. It's like whatever, floor worker at and that's a problem because now there's no unique traceability. There are ways to do it. There are, but again, it's going to be different for every organization in terms of how they actually manage that. And the same is true for MFA. It's depends on what tool you're using. Whether again people have all the resources they need right there to get it done. So I don't think there's a one size fits all for that. But it is one of the complex areas.
So what's the first generally the first part of the assessment? Is that the audit and accountability section, or is that
now it's access control? I mean,
access control? Okay.
You basically you always start with access control just because it's the biggest family of controls, and it probably takes the longest to go through. But it's also there a lot of it's foundational stuff. So how do you authorize people to get into the system? How do you actually give them access to what they need and only what they need. I mean that's
right. And that being the big piece.
The access of the concept of least privilege is huge, and you don't want everybody being a domain admin, or if you have how many people have domain admin rights, or all of these, you really have to nail down all that stuff early on in the assessment process. And those are some of the toughest controls to put in place.
Well, and that, unlike the SSP, which I feel like can be an organizational discussion, and people understand, how data comes in, where it moves around the company, and how it goes out. Something like access control feels really technical. And so now all of a sudden you've jumped over from a larger group of people that can probably answer questions to a really smaller group that understands how systems are built and who's logging in, what the data output might be. So do you find that you often have the expertise within a company to answer all those questions, or is that incumbent on you to sort of do the deep dive and understand it?
I rely on them to do the deep dive in terms of what they have for systems and what capabilities they can put in place to meet the control. Mainly because I do have a technical background. I was a field engineer years ago. I've been in the IT industry for 35 years. So I have a good technical background. I understand what can be done, but I rely on either their internal IT staff, or in many cases they're working with an MSP. And
right.
So I'll have the MSP during my gap assessments there, because they're going to be involved in the actual assessment itself. And they're going to have to show, okay, yeah, how did you handle that? Well, we put a group policy in place for that. Okay, great. Show me the group policy. Show me that that's actually enabled on all, on all users or all groups, or however you've done that. So I know that you can do this through group policy. Am I going to get on the keyboard and look at it? No. I rely on them for all that stuff. Same thing, how you configure your firewall, how you configure your security, within your servers and things like that. I rely on either the client themselves, if they have a strong internal IT staff, or the MSP.
So I want to be careful how I ask this. Because I tend, right, I used to do some of the CMMC work. I'm much more now on sort of the pre-sales discussion side often. And what I'll get are comments like, yeah, we're feeling pretty good about CMMC. We have a score of, I'll pick a number, 80, 90, something pretty high. And in some cases, I have no doubt, right? They put a lot of effort into it. Yep. Could very well be there, right? But in some cases, the comments might be, well, I did this 2 years ago and I self-assessed, and I think we're at 80. I usually feel that feels optimistic. What's your general feeling there? Because I'm sure you walk into organizations where they've already done an assessment, right?
Absolutely, and I share your skepticism when I hear numbers. Again, you can kind of look around sometimes, and somebody will tell you that, oh yeah, we got a 80 or 90 or something like that. And, I'll say, well, show me your system security plan. It's like, well, we don't really have one. It's like,
Right there.
you can't even, that's an instant fail. One of the things that the DoD and NIST really didn't do themselves any favors over the years, where they were saying, yeah, you need to implement these controls, but they didn't really give you guidance on what it meant to comply. And that's why a lot of these people were honest about, they were felt like, we did everything, well, show me your policy on that. Well, we don't have a policy. It's like, well, again, you can't meet the control without a policy in most cases. I mean, some of them you can, but most of them need, documented policies, documented procedures. And that's the area that's almost always missing, that they say we do it. We meet that, but again, none of it's documented. So you're not going to pass. So in the more recent years, where there's now very substantial training for CMMC certified professionals like myself, or CMMC certified assessors, that's where, if you go through that training, you really understand what it means to be compliant, what it means to meet those controls. That wasn't even available back in 2015, 2016, when, it was, here's go read this, go read the framework and just implement it. At least when they came out with CMMC, they came out with assessment guides that gave a little more detail, but they're still nowhere near the level of detail that you need to really understand that, yes, we do meet that control, or we don't. So I don't think these people are being malicious. They just didn't understand what it meant compliant.
Well, and I think, my opinion typically is people treat CMMC like it's really a technology obligation, which of course, right, there's huge elements of that.
Yeah.
But it's equal, if not greater parts, policies, procedures, documentation. I mean, that's a huge piece.
Absolutely. It's I'd say it's 75%. The actual technology.
You think that much? Okay.
Yeah. So.
And I think a lot of people do the right things. They haven't written down what they do, which is right. Kind of a challenge. So we use software to perform the assessment, but you also develop that POAM, and then ultimately collect all of the evidence in whatever that format that might look like, right? Whether it's documentation or screenshots or things. How often do you feel you're having conversations with folks that did an assessment, maybe in Excel, and kind of haven't done the work to consolidate all the artifacts that are ultimately going to help that audit process?
I'd say most of them used a like an Excel or something like that. They, very kind of unstructured program. There's a couple that I've been working with. They have a GRC tool in place. They've populated it. A lot of these manufacturers, they've gone through, ISO certification, and so they kind of built this set of documentation around that. If it's 9001, then it's very little of it's going to apply to CMMC. If it's 27001, more of it's going to apply, but it's generally not. There's a lot of gaps. But yeah, some of them use GRC tools, but most of them are just, it's a spreadsheet. It's like, yeah, here's what we did, and here's how we scored ourselves, and
right.
I'm like, okay.
And a lot of yeses and nos, but not really any data to back up.
Exactly. It's like, show me your policy. Oh yeah, we don't have that written down. It's like, well, then you're not compliant.
Maybe my kind of last question is, anywhere else that you see really like a real challenge for orgs? I think we hit a couple that I know are common, but anything else bubble up as really consistent problem?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest ones that people kind of have issues with is the configuration management section. That's where essentially you have to have a very structured way of deploying laptops and servers and firewalls, and document how those are configured. And, there's, are they mapped to some sort of a baseline and things like that. So people really have a struggle with that, because A, it's a lot of information. B, it gets very technical. And there are some guidance. There's some guidance out there that you can use to say, yeah, okay, this is how we've configured all these things. We think it's secure. There are what are called DoD STIGs system technical information guides, I think they stand for, that the DoD puts out, that if you're implementing this product, these are the settings that you want to set to be secure. There's CIS benchmarks that you can use to say, yeah, this is IG1. We've brought this up to IG1 or IG2, whatever it happens to be. You can even
And
buy
some of those might actually be like Windows policy settings where they can set for you, correct?
absolutely. They're this. You should have this GPO set. You should have this setting within this policy. You should have the even firewalls. If you have a Palo Alto firewall and you configure it this way, now you're CIS IG1 or CIS IG2, and again, that's going to be acceptable. CMMC doesn't demand you do any particular configuration. It just means that you document it, and it's consistent, and it's generally secure.
So I'm going to wrap up with this question. This is probably going to force you to opine a little bit. We haven't seen a lot of companies actually go through the formal audit yet. Then there aren't that many 3CPAOs out there. I mean, they're hundreds, right? But not probably enough for the ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
I feel like part of the consternation for a lot of the manufacturers that I speak with are, well, how do we know who's going to assess us? And frankly, how strict or lenient are they going to be? And I don't know that there's a ton of, one, there's not a ton of data on it because we haven't seen a lot of companies go through it. And two, this in the same way that there's probably a little bit of a lack of clarity on what you need to do to comply with CMMC to start with, there's probably some lack of clarity on how the auditor is going to engage in behavior. Right?
Yeah, and there is there's recognition of that at the Cyber AB. That's the group that basically oversees the whole program in terms of assessment and training and everything. And so they've actually created a brand new advisory board of C3PAO advisory board. And one of the things, is actually the one of the first subcommittees they created under one of these is focused on external service providers, of which MSPs and cloud service providers. There's a lot of misunderstanding around those. Okay. So there's definitely, this is a work in progress still, even though it's firm in law. There's going to be more known. Assessors are going to get better at, identifying things quickly. And frankly, there's been a lot of false starts too, that there's, the assessment process is a phased process. There's 4 phases. Phase 1 is basically collecting all the information, getting that to the C3PAO, and at the end of that, there's a go no go. It's like, look, we've looked at, we've skimmed your SSP, so we know you got one. Okay, that's good. And we've looked at some of the evidence. We've collected all this evidence. They haven't gone into it in detail, but they kind of get a general sense. It's like, you're ready. You have a higher likelihood of passing. They're not going to say you're going to pass. They're just going to say you have a likelihood, or they're going to say there's no way you're going to pass based on what we see. There's, so come back in 6 months after you fix some stuff or whatever. And so there's been a lot of those that they get in there because there's a real negative to going into phase 2 and beyond, because once you get in that phase, everything's official. Like whatever comes out of that, even if the first day they've already identified, there's no way they're going to pass this. They still have to post whatever score comes out of it. So you might as well go through the whole process. And it becomes, now it's official. It's it's in the EMAS system. It's known. This is your score. This is what you got. Yeah. So there's a lot of emphasis on, look, if they're not going to pass, fail quickly. It's really what it is.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Rather than spending a lot of time and money. Because I think there's, again, coming back to budget, there's definitely concerns around the potential cost for that audit when the time comes.
Oh, absolutely.
And, right. And that's the language that everybody uses anyway, is, this is an expensive program. Mm-hmm. And it's also not perfectly clear what we need to do. So you can't even really put that box around it easily.
Yeah. And like I said, it's the 100% or nothing is, perhaps, again, I can opine on this all day long, that maybe they could come up with, like, give you a little more leeway that, you don't have to have, one assessment objective, out of the 320, you miss one of those. and you're dead. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
it just seems like, wow, you know, a lot of times we talk about, you know, like perfection is the enemy of the good enough.
Of course. Yeah.
There's none of that. You know, it's basically perfection is what they're looking for. So
Yeah. And hopefully that doesn't come back to hurt the program, because I could see, you know, a lot of orgs sort of rolling the dice and say, well, you know, maybe I won't receive the contract that has the clause in it. I think that, you know, that's getting less and less likely, of course. Or, you know, maybe I won't be audited for 3 years and I can sort of skate along. I mean, there's that feeling.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's up to you whether you get audited or whether you get assessed, essentially. I mean, you contract with the C3PAO. They don't
That's
come
fair.
to you,
Okay.
you go to them. So, you know, it's a voluntary program if you want a cut of the federal pie, you know,
You go
so.
through it. Any last minute things you want to add before we adjourn here?
No, I think, you know, like I said, it is an evolving program, and I think, you know, it's going to change over time, as the assessors come back with different feedback from their assessments and what's really gotten in their way or their client's way or whatever. But so yeah, I mean, I'd say keep posted on the program, keep your eyes on it. It's, you know, I think overall it's a good thing. You know, people, organizations of all sorts need to up their game when it comes to cybersecurity. So this is just something that's going to force that. So, so yeah, overall it's a good program. I think it needs some tweaks though, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and you know, as I always say at the end of these, this certainly isn't a one and done. If you know, one, we do a ton of manufacturing work, so we've got a lot of expertise here. If anybody has questions though about it, you know, reach out to us. We're happy to just shed some light on it and go from there. And if, you know, if there's questions, we'll, you know, Mark, you can join back on and we'll talk more about, you know, some of the other objectives in here.
Sounds good.
Cool. Hey, thanks for joining. I appreciate the time this morning.
Thanks for having me. A lot of
Right,
fun.
well,
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.